Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologues. In case you haven't heard, I'm told there's an election coming up pretty soon. In some areas, there's a lot of violence and civil unrest. If you're in the market for personal protection for yourself or your family, I'd encourage you to visit Guns Etc. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and they have product. And they're getting new product all the time. They'll work with you to get the exact type of protection that fits your needs. Stop by their store in Mesa or visit gunsetcetera.com where you'll have access to over $400 million worth of firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriot's YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy September 9th, 2020. This didn't get remarked upon much, and it really should have. From Joe Biden's visit to Kenosha, Wisconsin last week. He had done his town hall, or church hall meeting, if you will. It was mostly over when he was asked to give concluding remarks. The event had already gone on about an hour. He expatiated on race, speaking of our 400-year-old original sin of slavery. It's an interesting phrase, that, with a long history, slavery as America's original sin. One can date it back to the 18th century at least. It was also used by Charles Sumner here in the 19th century and by others. I think it's an unhelpful phrase, for its use seems to be invoked today as a sin that cannot or ever be expiated, though time and again we thought it would or could be. Thomas Jefferson wrote or asked, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God? That they are not to be violated, but with his wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and that his justice cannot sleep forever." And Abraham Lincoln picked up that question in his second inaugural, saying, "The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always subscribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid with another drawn with the sword, as was said for 4,000 years ago, so must it be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and altogether righteous. Every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword." Of course, you know the history thereafter. History which brought us into the 1950s with desegregation, and the 1960s with the federal civil rights laws, effectively barring and banning any racist act whatsoever, from education to business. As I said before, there's a horrible and at once beautiful history in all this. Horrible because it was here and had to be taken on. Beautiful in the speeches, statements, and pure decency in those who fought the luridities of oppression. From the statements and speeches of Lincoln to those of Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, others. And at root, America's capacity for self-renewal. The eternal point in question, often forgotten here, is, does our society and history and founding have what it takes to fix things by redounding to them, or does it need to be cast aside, done away with, destroyed because too many tolerated those luridities for too long? Jefferson, Lincoln, and King, to name just three, thought our founding could and should be redounded to. How did Lincoln put it? So many ways. Among them, this is one of my favorites, discussing how to look back to our beginning, even when those who handed it down have died and passed on. Speaking to the generation that no longer could physically know revolutionary soldiers and immigrants, he said, quote, "If they look back through this history to trace their connection with those days by blood, they find they have none. They cannot carry themselves back into the glorious epoch and make themselves feel that they are part of us. But when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that those old men say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then they feel that that moral sentiment taught in that day evidences their relation to those men, that it is the father of all moral principle in them, and flesh of the men who wrote the Declaration, and so they are. That is the electric cord in that Declaration that links the hearts of patriotic and liberty-loving men together, that will link those patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists in the minds of men throughout the world, close quote. In other words, cut the electric cord that ties us all together and reap the whirlwind, but recognize the cord and reap the light. Take the light. We know how to reap the whirlwind. We're going through that now. I'm not sure we have done enough to accept the light. And every time I hear about our original sin, a seed in my head rattles. How to expiate it after every drop of blood drawn with the lash was paid with another drawn by the sword. After the Civil Rights Act, based on the Declaration of Independence, after all this time, it is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about teaching American history. So my ears perked up when, after speaking of our original sin, Joe Biden last week said exactly this to his audience in Kenosha. Quote, I can't guarantee you everything gets solved in 4 years, but I guarantee you one thing, it'll be a whole lot better. We'll move a lot further down the road. People fear that which is different. We got to, for example, why in God's name don't we teach history in history classes? Close quote. Right then and there I stood up thinking, yes, please, great. And then I sat down and shook my head when I heard his next sentence, which was exactly this, quote, a black man invented the light bulb, not a white guy named Edison, okay? Close quote. He said that looking into the eye of one of his audience members. And in that sentence, he ruined everything, or unwittingly told us everything we needed to know about what is so wrong with our country today. Why? Because it simply is not true. It's not true. Biden was speaking of Lewis Latimer, who did not beat Edison to the light bulb, but did, in fact, work for Edison. Yes, bad history is what has led us here, and Joe Biden immanentized it in the worst way, trying to make a serious point to heal while compounding the very error that has riven us. Why could he not explain our capacity for self-renewal? Why could he not explain the history that Roger Taney and the Dred Scott majority got so wrong? Why could he not explain that while some of our country had slavery, a larger part did not, and a war begun by the former was taken up on and won by the latter? Why could he not invoke Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King, who called our founding magnificent, glorious, and the very touchstone for everything we did to repair our past wrongs? Why did he have to perpetuate an actual untruth instead? Because that is who he is. That is what the left is. That is what the Democratic Party has to exist and subsist on. Great untruths and big little lies. Recall the lines of the scientist from Chernobyl. What is the cost of lies? It's not that we'll mistake them for the truth. The real danger is that if we hear enough lies, then we no longer will recognize the truth at all. And so we easily reinvent the past to our own present wills, just as Marx told us the importance of not understanding history, but changing it. Just as Orwell explained, just as we know almost every revolutionary movement the world has ever known does. How did Joe LeConte put it? The problem with distorting history is it subjects our youth to propaganda. We have a listener who wished to remain anonymous due to the modern tyranny of employment repercussions. But she wrote me this, and I quote, Joe Biden is selling himself as the politician that can bring black and white together. He believes that by speaking in soft, reflective, placating tones, he can convince you that he has the insight and ability to heal the country. However, his recent comment that a black man invented the light bulb demonstrates why he cannot do so. It's not just that he was wrong. It's that if he truly wanted to bring people together, he completely botched the opportunity. After he made the comment, I, of course, looked up the information. What I read was truly inspiring. It was a strikingly poignant example of black and white working together to further the human condition. The brilliance of the son of a slave and the acceptance of that capacity for brilliance by forward-thinking innovators had profound consequences for the rest of society. It was an example of what can be accomplished when people on both sides work together toward a common goal. Instead of stressing all of the ways these innovators and inventors worked together, Biden had to immediately try and topple the white guy in favor of the black guy. That is not bringing people together and teaching the benefits that can be achieved by working together. That is merely trying to replace the people in one race with the people in another. That is the mistake that Biden makes. That is why he will never be able to bring people together. Presentation is important. Content and message are important. Making derisive remarks using your thoughtful voice isn't going to bridge the gap. Just the opposite is true. Biden's remarks have widened the gap because now black people think that they may have invented the light bulb and the white people stole it from them or took the credit for it. It intentionally creates in black people a belief that white people took yet another something from them. Of course, that was probably Joe Biden's goal when he made the statement. Some people throw gas on the fire and some people throw a log on the fire. While the gas burns hot and fast, the log burns slow and long. Biden's log is just as damaging as throwing gas on the fire. It causes the same burning hatred to ignite. In fact, in many ways, it's worse. Unlike the hot flash of gas that is quickly identified and dealt with, the log goes virtually unnoticed when it is placed on the fire. As a result, it can surreptitiously continue the long, slow burn that fuels the breakdown of race relations in America. I don't for 1 minute think Biden misunderstood the facts that he presented. I think he presented the historical event in a manner which he knew would have the most damaging impact. In order to continue the animosity, you must continue to make people think you took something away from them. There is nothing like the feeling of being cheated to stoke resentment and hatred. I might have a completely different opinion of you, Mr. Biden, had you actually made your history lesson the teachable moment that you pretended it was. Unfortunately, it is now just one more lost opportunity. But congratulations, your log is burning nicely. Well said. That is so well written, so well put. It reminds me of Oliver Wendell Holmes' statement that a page of history is worth a volume of logic. But it also asks, what is a bad or tendentious page of history worth? What does false history yield? One might answer the opposite of logic. A falsity, a sophistry, an inverse of the best logic gives us natural law, and with it the equality of all humanhood. The very grounding Martin Luther King and so many others deployed to discern between justice and injustice, between just and unjust laws. Tearing that down or up leads to violence and rioting. There's a reason the segregationists used violence. The civil rights workers and marchers used nonviolence. One knew the difference between right and wrong, just and unjust, the natural law. The other side lived in deception or darkness, something that could really use a little light, an electric cord, or maybe just a light bulb. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.